back to Heart-Led Changemakers, where we explore the souls behind the systems and the leaders who are rewriting the way we care for one another. Today's guest is Lisa O'Malley, a woman whose life is woven with devotion, courage, and an unshakable commitment to children, to families, and the carers who hold them. Nearly 20 years ago, Lisa and her family stepped into the world of adoption, foster care, and child protection. Since then, they have opened their home and their hearts to more than 200 children, providing safety, love, and stability during the most vulnerable moments of a child's life. But Lisa didn't stop at caring. She saw the isolation many carers face and the invisible emotional load, the lack of community, the misunderstanding from the outside and being outside of the system. And she decided to build what didn't exist. From informal gatherings to community advocacy, from peer support to government engagement, Lisa has become a voice for change in a system that desperately needs it. She brings lived experience, fierce compassion, and grounded wisdom into conversations. And these aren't happening often enough. And it's an opportunity for us to understand about the people who are being most affected. In today's conversation, we're going to explore the unseen emotional reality of foster care, why carers need community, safety, and support, what children in crisis most need from the adults around them, how lived experience can shape policy and drive system-wide reform, and what it truly means to stand for love in a world that often forgets to care. This is a conversation about humanity, resilience, and the quiet leadership that changes lives one child and one family at a time. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Maryanne. You put all of that together so perfectly. When I hear somebody talk like that, I never actually think about what I do and what some of the other carers that contribute and help out. I guess we never actually stop to look at what is it that we do. So hearing you put all that together just gave such a good perspective, and you nailed it.
All of my guests sort of say the same thing at the beginning of the podcast. Every single guest I genuinely care about, and I am passionate about the work that they're doing. So for me, this is my way of honoring each and every guest. So I'm glad that landed for you, because to me, that's probably the most important part of the podcast from my perspective. Whatever happens now is going to be gold anyway, but that part, I feel like it sets the tone and the pace. So I'm glad that you were able to receive it in the way that it's intended. But Lisa, you as I was sort of describing, you've welcomed over 200 children into your home. So when you look back, what first called you into the world of adoption and foster care? What happened?
I guess some of us are born to have babies easily, and for me, that wasn't such an easy experience, and I couldn't go down that path again. We still wanted a larger family. So, that was fine. That was didn't create any issues for us. And we thought, well, we had the capacity to bring another child into our family. So at that time, I guess South Australian adoption process is pretty slow, if not usually non-existent. So we looked into inter-country adoption, and like many others, we completed all the assessment process, and eventually we had a file sent overseas to adopt from overseas. So then in the meantime, the child protection or the foster caring side of things put out a call into the adoption community asking if anybody would be willing to put their hand up to do fostering in the meantime, because the fostering side of things was in crisis. They had so many children in need of families and care. And we thought, well, why weren't we doing that anyway? And I also knew other foster carers at the time. So we put our hand up for that. And of course, you have to resit and redo all the assessments. So that was more assessments, more time. And we eventually approved for adoption, for fostering. And in no time at all, we had children coming to our home, sometimes one at a time, sometimes two or three at a time. And really the only time we heard from inter-country adoption was when there was paperwork to update and fees to pay. And at that time, we were seeing more and more of our own children here in South Australia needing us. So it came to a stage where we just thought, why are we doing this? We have so many children in our community, in our state, that need our help. And so we decided to pull our file out from overseas for adoption and just focus on foster care. And it was always with the view that you would usually hope that when children come into care, it's so that perhaps their parents are getting some kind of support, there's some intervention happening, and that most of those children would go home again. But of course, in no time at all, we had children who we knew wouldn't be going home, and we couldn't face thinking that these children were going to be moved on to other people, other placements, they call it. I don't like that. I prefer calling them children and families. So in no time at all, we had a little person that would stay with us forever. So we still continued doing emergency respite care, short-term care. And then before we knew it, we had another young person that would also stay with us forever. So we've probably had over 200 placements, but formally that would be a little bit less I guess if people are counting children, because some of those children came to us more than once, and some might have been reunified and then come back into care, so they would come to us again. We're still registered. My husband's had a few knee replacements of late, so we've kind of ticked a bit of a pause on having more children coming into our home at the moment until he's back on his feet properly. And yeah, then we'll perhaps do some more emergency and have some respite. There are a lot of carers out there who are desperate for respite and even day respite. So that's pretty much how we rolled from adoption processes and then across into fostering. And of course, then for really stable long-term placements, you can enter into the guardianship space where you become guardians of young people in your care.
It's an incredible journey to want to open your home and to grow your family, and then to realize there are children locally that need that care and support. They need a place to land, that it's not a placement, as you said. It is a family that they get to be a part of. And to understand that there are different levels of foster care as well. I think a lot of people don't realize that there is emergency, the emergency respite, and then there's the daycare, and and so forth, and then the guardianship. I think I don't know that that's so well known. I think people understand what foster care is, but I don't think they understand the intricacies and what's available. And so I'm really glad to bring that to the forefront, because there's opportunity for us to impact our community more and more, and coming together to support these young children is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Lisa.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, when I'm talking to people out in the community, they often say that work isn't something that they could give up. So they would find it really hard taking in long-term children. But once you get talking to them, and respite is an incredible support to foster carer families. And it doesn't have to be a whole weekend. It doesn't have to be, a set date. You can work closely with a long-term foster family, and you can come up with some kind of arrangement between the two, and you almost come like extended family.
Yeah.
So I have many, many children over the years that would come to me regularly, and I became auntie, and they still call me auntie today.
Yeah.
So it's also providing an extended family for some children that don't have the opportunity to have that otherwise, plus a great support and then friendship for the long-term foster carer that they provide respite for. So some people kind of refer to it as I just do respite, but it's just so valuable for carer families and for the children that get those extended relationships as well.
What did those early days teach you about children, about trauma, and the realities of what families face behind closed doors?
Some of it was pretty sad. You would see children coming into care who had been treated really terribly and had, an awful lot of trauma, all sorts of learning delays and things stemming from abuse and neglect. But then at the same time, I saw many children coming in who probably never needed to be removed from their families had there been really early intervention and preservation and support for those families. Because, some families just hit tough times, and it could be that people have lost their jobs, then they've lost their house as a result of that. That impacts on their mental health. It's that cumulative stuff where if there was somebody around and available early on in the piece that could have helped them get back on their feet and keep supporting their children maybe never would have had to have been removed. And I'm still seeing that today. We quite often see children that should be removed that are not removed, left in families' care, and then something awful's happened to them, as we see in the media. And then we see children that have been removed, and you could easily see that if the parents have had a bit of support or there had been a bit of earlier searching by grandparents and aunties and uncles' family, that these children never need to have a care experience. So I'm a big advocate for the informal, we have registered foster and kinship carers who are registered with Child Protection. And then there are so many informal carers who take on the care of their grandchildren or their nieces and nephews, and they receive no support at all. So I believe if we better supported those people, it would save those children entering the care space. And then eventually, if they decide to look for family to take those children in, that could potentially go back to those people anyway. So I don't understand why we don't better support those families now to stop them entering the care space and having a care experience. Because for most children, it is not fun being engaged and involved with the Department for Child Protection. It's not normal. And a lot of children see that. And then it also enters a space where if they end up with foster carers, the foster carers are having to fight so hard for the most basic type of support for these kids. And then if there's no foster carers, sadly, these children are going to residential care. And we currently have about 700 children in residential care in South Australia, which is devastating.
Of course.
It's not it is not the right place for children to grow up. Children need families. And residential care should only be used when there is absolutely no opportunity to place that young person in a family environment. And that residential care comes at a cost of around $650,000 to $700,000 a year per child in residential care. So that cost is at taxpayers. And if we better supported our foster and kinship carers, we could probably save $600,000 per year per child, the
Yeah.
taxpayers, and achieve better outcomes for these kids because, all kids thrive better in families.
I mean, those statistics are sort of mind blowing. I think, again, I don't know that people understand how many children just in one state, let alone our whole country, are in those circumstances. It's really eye opening, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to chat to you and have you on the show, because I wanted to shine a light on all the areas where people are blind to. And one of the, just sort of going off our my last question, you spoke about carers and what their experience is, and about the isolation. But what does that loneliness look like and feel like from their perspective?
I know when I first became a carer, I did know a couple of people that were carers. So I had a little bit of an idea and knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Once I got a couple of years in, I realized that when I started going to perhaps more training and more events, and I had a bit more time to do that, I just saw that carers weren't turning up, and that often if I did see a foster carer or a kinship carer, they would tell me that they weren't getting information and they didn't know if something was occurring. And so I started looking a bit more into that. And that's when I started morning teas and lunches and like carer catch-ups out in the Gawler area. And before I knew it, I just had these really large groups of carers turning up, and realised that carers had been kept quite isolated. And so the more I did to bring carers together, the more carers turned up, and the connections they made were invaluable, because I know that I was able to step away from organising that group eventually, and those people still catch up today. And I still see and are in contact with most of those people today. And some of those relationships have gone on to people supporting each other, providing respite for each other, or really close friendships, people holidaying together. It's that support, because if the only people that can genuinely support a carer is another carer, because we don't have to try to imagine what is it like and what does empathy or sympathy look like. For us, it's already, we feel that. So I think the lived experience and supporting each other is what's most valuable. And I've just kept trying to connect as much as I can over the years, to the point where I have really great connections now over most of the state. And it shouldn't be so hard. And I believe that we're the only people providing that really, truly independent support for carers, providing a safe space, because obviously carers are quite fearful.
Mm.
There's many carers who have been threatened over the years that, if you advocate too strongly, will remove your children from your care.
Mm.
So trying to create a safe space for carers to come together or even connect. So we have the Carer Project private Facebook page, where there is only foster kinship grandparent carers, or those that have gone on to become guardians. And there's over 800 carers on there now. And they can contribute and engage as much or as little as they want to. They ask questions. I know that there are carers on there that now have formed relationships, and they get to catch up with other carers in their areas. So that is the most important thing, I think, for foster and kinship carers, is having that independent support and trying to support their emotional and mental health, whilst they are usually having to strongly advocate for the needs of their children to be met, and for them to have the support that they need.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. And that peer support feels essential from what you're saying, because when it's absent, you're carrying an even greater weight than you were before. And so to have someone that you don't have to explain the complexities of these issues and the challenges of being a carer, to automatically know these people already understand, would absolutely give them some respite, and it would make them feel like that journey is less lonely. So that makes a lot of sense. My next question to you, Lisa, is like, after supporting so many children, what do you believe they need most from the adults that are caring for them?
What do they need most? There is, there's the usual love and that basic care provision of providing everything they need. But I think they need the people caring for them to be brave and to be their voice, because these kids don't always have a voice. And if their needs aren't being met, they need us to strongly advocate for these children. I believe when I became a carer, I made a promise to any child coming into my home that I would advocate to make sure their needs were met. And it's not acceptable if they're not, because if the government is taking children away from their families because they're not providing, then the government cannot do the same. They have to provide for these children. So I think that's the most important thing, is that, even when it's not easy advocating. And I often tell myself, and my friends say the same, that we're the adults in this room, and we need to step up and deliver on our promises to these children and make sure that their needs are met when they need to be met. If these children need therapy or medical intervention or disability equipment, they need that today, not 3 years' time. So, I think that's our strongest role. And it also shows these children and young people that they matter. We don't just take them into our home and it's same old, same old. And, some of these children haven't been to school, or they've not been to school in such a very long time. So that's up to us to make sure that when they land in our care at their age, what is it? What do they need today? What do we need to push for to get in place as quickly as possible to best support these kids to start healing, to also feel like they matter and that they're valued by our community and equal to all the other kids in the community. And that's something that I've seen in the kids, the older children and the young people, is so many of them take on such a sense of shame because they are removed, because they are in care. And these kids are just as important and special as every other child in our community. So, I believe that if our members of parliament or our premier, if his children get timely service and timely equipment and timely school registration and attendance, every child in our state deserves the same. And that's something that I make a priority, is to make sure that they feel equal to all of the other kids.
Yes, I love that so much. What do you think are the misconceptions that you wish the public understood about foster care and child protection?
The misconceptions. First of all, I think is quite a common reaction to children in care. Quite a few people think that they're bad kids, and they're not. But it's so important that they are placed into families and that healing process begins and that the opportunities grow for these children. Obviously, we know that there haven't been as great outcomes for children going into residential care. That's why I'm such a big advocate to get these kids out of residential care. And I think the problem with the community is that they don't actually hear from foster carers, because foster carers are afraid to speak out. So child protection, if you have a look at any inquiry that has taken place in the last 20 years, royal commissions, select committees, all of them have highlighted that this system is in crisis and that there is an awful culture within the department. And the community only hear what they see in the media, which is a 5-minute snippet, a headline grabber, and it doesn't really inform the public or the community of how children are being disadvantaged, how the taxpayers' money is being spent and could be spent better. And, I find that we keep throwing money at a system that's in crisis and putting band-aids on band-aids, but nobody's brave enough and willing to just get rid of all the band-aids and let's like hit this wound right now and let's just start restructuring and redressing, because that's what it needs. And the band-aids just keep mounting. And the more band-aids we put on, the more money it's costing taxpayers and the longer it takes to get an outcome for children.
For sure. I mean, you engage now with government officials, parliament members, sector leaders, all of it. You are really everywhere, and I've seen you do that in real time, which is such a joy to watch. You know how to hustle a room harder. It was very inspiring, that's for sure. But is that why you think the advocacy is so important now? What you were just describing, like, because it's like band-aids on top of band-aids, is that why the advocacy for you is something you're so passionate about?
It is, because if we don't tell members of parliament, the premier, if we don't tell them what some of these solutions look like, they're only hearing from one side of the fence. And I guess I keep doing what I'm doing, hoping that eventually I find that person that is actually brave enough to call time out and say, we're not going to keep repeating the same things over and over, expecting different outcomes. Because, honestly, while they're all mucking around in offices and refusing to change, like, there appears to be no appetite for change at all at the moment. And I did have high hopes a couple of years ago, and I'm not seeing an appetite for change, not genuine change. In the meantime, while everybody's playing games, we are having children abused and neglected and dying. And that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that the adults in the room aren't willing to step up and finally change. And if people don't want to change, well, then if they don't get to choose. I think someone brave needs to come in and acknowledge and hear from the people with lived experience. And I'll tell you what, we've presented many recommendations. So the Care Project instigated the independent inquiry into fostering kinship care back in about 2022 with Honourable John Darley. We got that legislation through Parliament. We got the inquiry up and running. Unfortunately, it wasn't conducted by an independent person. And we were promised by who is now the Child Protection Minister, that if carers weren't happy with the outcomes of that inquiry, she would review those outcomes with fostering kinship carers and would look at those recommendations. So we went to work writing up recommendations, which we gathered from direct feedback to fostering kinship carers. Now, I believe we're the only people that collect information, feedback via surveys and polls and interactions from carers, and use that information without altering it or briefing it in any way. So everything we presented was based on honest feedback direct from carers, and really, really great solutions that would solve so many of the problems, that's kind of dwell on the bottom, by providing solutions at more of a higher level. So, XYZ is going to eliminate a lot of this below. Now, we had over 400 fostering kinship carers sign voting forms for those recommendations and for the review. We then facilitated a forum with the Minister and the former CE of Child Protection, where in that room every carer had the opportunity to speak up and address the minister and CE and vote in front of them for those recommendations. Not one of those recommendations has been accepted, implemented. The review has never taken place, and the Child Protection Minister refuses to explain why. And here we are now, 3 years later, heading into another election, and carers have not achieved any genuine change that will either change the way they are treated by the sector or change the way they can achieve more timely outcomes for the children in their care. And the financial burden that carers bear they continually refuse to address that too. So foster and kinship carers are volunteers. They are not paid. They get a very, very small contribution towards costs and are supposed to be reimbursed for certain items. That reimbursement doesn't come anywhere near close to covering costs associated with caring with a child in care, and they're not receiving all the reimbursements that they should be receiving. And in many cases, they're being forced to fund things like therapies or medical gaps and things like that. So they're the only volunteers in society that are forced to pay costs for those they provide care to. And I find that unacceptable.
Yes, yes. And so what do you think are the major changes that carers and children, like, what do they most need right now? Is it the funding? Like, what's like the most urgent from your perspective?
My suggestion has been, and I've discussed this with the Premier, so anything I speak about anywhere, I'm very respectful. They're always aware I've had those conversations with the game changers. So my suggestion is that, firstly, we remove that financial burden for carers, and government, every foster and kinship carer receives a specialist payment, which covers your day-to-day food and electricity and those types of costs. And then aside from that, they cover all out-of-pocket costs for things like education, medical, dental, therapy, connection to culture and family. Now, those two things combined would really, really relinquish that financial burden for carers, and at the same time still come in at so much less than what they are paying for kids in residential care. So I don't understand. It's nonsensical that we do not support the most therapeutic model of care for these children, which achieves best outcomes. So that's the first thing, is releasing that financial burden for carers. The second is we've strongly advocated for an independent complaints and investigation mechanism. We put forward a structure designed with the Honourable John Darley, which would look like some kind of we can call it perhaps a guardianship board. And that would be supported by an independent investigation unit and an independent care advocate. So not a carer advocate, a care advocate. So if you're a birth parent and you're struggling with something, you have the opportunity to access that care advocate as well. So that would be the complaint investigation. And we also need independent oversight. There is no oversight of this department. So we've had children known to be, at the time, physically abused and neglected, and all sorts of awful things happening. And despite the number of CAL reports, there's no action taken. But there is nobody with oversight that can step in and say, we're going to get in here straight away and we're going to have a look at what are these concerns being made, and we're going to take this child out and we're going to get this child safe whilst we investigate. We're seeing so many deaths in the media where children are left there. And then we decide after the fact that, oh, we'll be a bit more transparent next time. I don't want transparency. I want action. We prevent the harm. We prevent the deaths so that we don't have to worry about, are we being transparent enough? So the first one is financial. The second one is independent complaints, investigation and oversight. The third one is obviously respite. And I think respite should look like, should be fully funded, and it should be tailored to every family's unique needs. Because there are some families who could really do with a weekend out, and the child might go off to the respite carer. Carers will go do whatever they want for the weekend. There are other carers that would prefer somebody to go into their home and stay in the home so that the child can get to stay in their home. There are others that might just want a day respite, opportunity to have a night out and dinner, and then that's it. They don't want a whole weekend. Others might want to save up, a couple of months respite and go away for a week. So I believe that respite is not respite unless it is tailored to every family's unique needs. So that's what I would like to see. And I would also like to see court standing for carers. So you could have a child in your care for 6 months, 12 months or more, and the case could go back to court suddenly, or reunification court. And you don't have the opportunity or the legal right. You don't have the legal right to go into the court and tell the court about the child that you've been caring for. You don't get to tell them about the child's wishes. You don't get to speak of any concerns you might have. And you don't get to speak if you do have a good relationship with the birth parents. You don't even get to speak and give that. Yeah. So there has to be court standing for carers, because we deal with the only court that does not put any value on evidence. Every other court investigates and talks to every witness involved in the scenario. And yet these are our most vulnerable children, and we exclude people that often have the most valuable information and genuine information. So the court standing and some strong legislative rights for carers in legislation. But of course, without the independent oversight and complaints mechanism, anything embedded in legislation or policy is useless, because there is nobody holding anybody accountable. Yeah. But those few things would address all of the little things at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to understand about all of those areas, but how can our lived experience reshape the policies and the systems from what can often feel bureaucratic and disconnected from reality? Like how do we come together to create that change?
Again, it begins with somebody being brave enough to go against the grain and say, this is how we're going to do things differently. Because currently the narrative is quite tightly controlled, and it's a system designed, despite having a statement of commitment to all carers, there are only select people that often get to really be heard and be included. I've been putting my hand up for years to sit on the carer recruitment and retention task force. Been asking for years and years, refused. So there's not actually carers sitting on that task force. There's a peak body, but they don't represent all carers. So I've asked and asked, been refused. Again, we are losing carers. Nobody ever counts how many carers are walking away, how many carers have put themselves on hold and not taking any more placements, and how many carers are waiting for the child they do have in their care to either return to family or turn 18 and age out. So somebody might go out into the media and tell the community that we've recruited 100 new carers. Nobody's telling the community how many carers have either been deregistered or walked away. And I used to talk at information sessions to recruit carers, and I remember asking an agency, how are we going with these recruitment sessions? And they spoke about a couple of numbers, the numbers of carers that we'd actually registered. And I asked, how many carers have we lost in that time? When they estimated that, I said, so realistically, if we were a business, we would have been broke years ago because we're running at a loss. And I was really surprised by the person's reaction that I was talking to, that they never saw that. They never thought of that. And they couldn't identify that themselves. So the lived experience is so important, because, again, we've got the solutions based on a very, very high number of lived experience carers' feedback. But the decision makers, the game changers, are refusing to engage and are refusing to implement those changes that are needed. And at the same time, we have children being disadvantaged and going without, and carers walking away. So it comes down to educating the community, because at the end of the day, community have a responsibility. We all vote.
Yep.
So people need to start looking beyond what are they seeing on social media. They might see, yay, they got a new football stadium, or they love golf. Um, People, they need to start getting out and really engaging with the community and start looking at how they vote. Because we've had some amazing support from independents in our state's parliament these last few years, trying to make some change for these children in care. Also, some of the members of the Liberal Party in our Legislative Council have been incredible. So people need to stop believing what they see in social media, all the happy stories that they see in the news, and start thinking, what is the stuff that we're not hearing about? Well, you're not hearing about the suffering of foster and kinship carers. You're not hearing about the disadvantage that children are suffering and the delays. There is no excuse. Everyone says it's complex. It's not complex. There's a lot involved, but we also have a lot of solutions. And when we all start to work together, we can have more children in family-based homes. We will have more children in school. We'll have more children going on to getting part-time jobs, finishing school, get employment, paying taxes, contributing back to the communities that supported them. But it's not going to happen until it's power. Drop the power, put the kids first, and we can fix most of these things that aren't working.
Oh, I mean, that's a chef's kiss, that is everything. What you just said is like putting everything back into perspective. And I love that it's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the politicians and the government officials and the people who are setting the system. It is everyone. And it is our responsibility to have an awareness about what is really happening in our community beyond the superficial crap, if you will, that means nothing. And people are reaching for the superficial because that's band-aiding too. That's like, oh, well, that just gives me a little bit of relief that I can, have joy for an hour or, a couple of hours every week. Big deal. What will create fundamental change is understanding what is happening in our community on a local level, immediately knowing how we can create change and impact, what we can do to come back together. It is not hard, and you are so right about that. It is not hard. The solutions are there, and they are not even new innovative solutions. It's just going back to the basics. It's coming back to reprioritizing what is important. And I don't think it takes bravery. I know that you were saying that. I think it actually takes a willingness. It's not bravery, because I don't feel like it's brave. There's nothing brave about basic things. I think it's a willingness to step forward and allow transformation for the greater good rather than individual. I think everyone's got, especially in politics, it feels very individualized. Everyone has their own agenda, and we are distorted. It's fractured. And so I just love so much what you said about stepping outside of what you are being told. And that's that cognitive, skill set. What's your cognitive resonance with what is happening all around you? Are you just accepting what you're being told? And you can see very much with the government, and even in small business, I reference a slave master dynamic, and it's the same thing with all these systems. It is, well, we're just accepting it. This is just what we're being told. Everything's fine there. Kids are being looked after. There's foster carers, and it's fine. Sure, we know that there's some problems there, and there could probably be more, but is that really urgent? Is that really important? But people aren't thinking beyond. They're not looking at the threads that extend. And when you were saying about how if that was a business, they would have gone bust years ago. The fact that people aren't even thinking about that. And again, not even having a carer on the board. I just, So how are you gaining any kind of perspective? And then you've got the court side of things, which is a whole other piece, which makes so much sense as
Uh-huh.
well with what you're saying. But it's just a lot. And so my question to you, Lisa, is, with all of this, with understanding the complexities, being a carer, being an advocate, talking to these officials, being in the system, all of these things, how do you stay emotionally grounded while you're doing this deeply personal work?
I'm glad you think I am. Thank you. It is frustrating, and look, I've worked really, really hard to form some good relationships. I spent so much time in Parliament House, um, also in other departments, other parts of the sector, and I've worked really hard to establish some of those relationships. And and those people share the same frustrations because there are so many people that do want change, but
Mm,
there are also too many people that don't. So I guess when I mention bravery for fostering kinship carers, there's that overarching fear of someone's going to knock on my door today and take my children away for speaking up. And that's a
mm,
very real fear.
mm,
Or they're going to get a malicious care concern. So that's the fear for them. But then I also know some amazing workers who I've worked really closely with on getting some great outcomes for some kids. And they also really, really want change. But likewise, if they speak up too much, I've heard from some who are there today, gone tomorrow.
mm.
And if you go against the grain, it's not always welcome. And I think all of us wanting change need to stand up together.
Yep.
And again, the community and everybody back us up. And we do that together. And I guess what keeps me emotionally, let's say, stable, some people might, say different, but you know what? I get angry, I get pissed off when I hear that there's a child going without something, and it's absolutely unacceptable. Especially our really um, medically complex, disabled, palliative children who are advocating for the slightest things, be it, specialized safe beds. We ended up with a child sleeping on a mattress on the floor, despite them being so physically disabled and their airways compromised. That's unacceptable. We've, is another one where a child needed a wheelchair, was in the same wheelchair for so many years, caused harm to their body, and has been moved around their home on an office chair without a wheelchair. These things are unacceptable. And anybody responsible for making those decisions and making that happen would never accept that for their own children. So, it does, it pisses me off. But you also still have to be able to go in anywhere and advocate and keep everything on track, on task, um, and be professional to so that you do get doors opened, you can talk to somebody. But it's unacceptable that we even have to do that.
Of course. But how do you personally take care of you? That's really what I'd like to know, because it's an overwhelming space and quite heartbreaking. So how do you keep your sanity during all of this? Despite all of these external things that you're doing and obviously your passion, but what do you do for you?
Um, I have a great network of friends or people around me. Um, you know, I often head out for a walk. I just head off for a walk on my own, or I just came back from a conference interstate, which was great for networking. But I find that stuff really satisfying and rewarding, even though it's still hard work. I actually find enjoyment in that. So, even doing things like that, or sitting down with a group of carers just to have a coffee, where everybody can have a bit of a vent in a safe space, and spending time with my family. Uh, nothing too much, but enough. What is enough for me? So, yeah.
I love that. When you think about heart-led leadership, what does that look like through the lens of fostering advocacy and community support?
Heart-led. I think it comes down to again that lived experience, the connectedness, and it's in your heart when you care for these children and the families. I mean, I'm in contact with quite a lot of birth parents too.
Yep.
I also have residential care workers reach out to me. I have NGO and DCP staff reach out to me. So that heart-led, I think, has to be the genuine lived experience, the connectedness across the sector, not just with our own peers, like I said, with the others involved in the sector, child-focused, so that we're always looking at, because it isn't easy, you know, and all of us could probably look back and go, geez, I probably could have handled that situation for that child differently. Or I could have done this differently. Everyone's human. You don't get to do a run through 10 years of training and then go back and you've got your own experience. So heart-led is making sure that it's all driven by lived experience and connectedness so that we can support each other. We keep the kids at the centre of everything, which means supporting the carers and families.
Yes.
And that's it. It's heart-led, but it's also being able to keep that focus on, you know, what is at the centre of everything that we are actually advocating for. You know, I don't know any carers that are out there advocating for therapies or medical appointments for their kids because they want it. You know, I've had carers, you know, be told by workers before, if you want it, you pay for it. So it's keeping those kids at the heart and centre of everything. No carer wants to spend daily or weekly their time sitting in appointments for no reason. So we're advocating for those kids to get what they need. Yep. You know, if there's a disabled child in need of a vehicle, I can tell you that vehicle, it's not trendy, it's not a sports car, and it's not what most of us grew up thinking that we would want to own one day. It's a safe vehicle to meet the needs of that child. So it's making sure everything we're advocating for, it's heart-led because we all love the kids, we all care about the kids, and it's not just about the one in my care, it's about all of our state's kids. Yep. But then it's keeping focused on that drive for change.
Yes, yes. And so for anyone listening who feels called to foster or support carers or to become an advocate for systemic change, what is your invitation to them?
I would firstly invite them to reach out to me on social media. I have my public page, an advocate page. If you know a foster carer, not everybody can become a foster carer, but everybody can do something. So even if you know a foster carer, you have a foster carer at the end of your street, you would be amazed at what a tray of homemade lasagna knocked on the door and dropped off, the difference that would make to a carer. Or, you know, reach out to me, get involved and start learning about what is it we need to change it at a parliamentary level. What needs to change in legislation. We've just had some new legislation passed, which most stakeholders opposed and tried to stop having that passed because it is not fulsome. It doesn't represent everything or anything that carers have asked for. So reach out, and if you've got a skill, if you do law or you provide some kind of service and you think, well, I can't foster children, but I would love to offer my services to you to help provide for some carers, like reach out and let us know, help us. And I think when everybody starts coming together and we start educating each other, helping each other, when it does come around to election time and voting time, people actually start to understand what is it they're voting for. That's the biggest change everybody can make, because I have so many people say to me, I don't know whether to vote for this leader or this leader. And I say to them, you can't vote for either because you don't live in their electorate. So people don't realise that. So it's people educating people, showing them what they can help us achieve and where those changes are made and build up, give us the numbers that we need to be heard. I mean, everybody's seen these marches taking place across our state as well as the rest of the country. And, there's people marching for Palestine. There's people marching for greyhounds, anti-abortion, even for protest laws. Everybody's marching for everything. Nobody's marching for our own kids here in South Australia. And a quick example of what the attention can look like is a few carers went to the last march, not to march for anything political or anything else other than raising awareness for kids. So carers carried some big white posters with black writing on there to say, foster carers matter. Someone had one that said, help us, Peter. And just different statements about fostering and kids in care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how much attention that gained from people marching or walking past. So many people stopping and saying to me, what's this about? Because everyone else marching, some people were carrying, Australian flags, Aboriginal flags, and they're all marching, but nobody actually carried something which represented what was it in society that they wanted changed.
Yeah.
So there were people there that were annoyed about the aged care services, but nobody was carrying something to represent that. Whereas carers turning up doing that. And there were a few people saying, what a great idea. And I said, well, what are you here marching for?
Yeah.
And a couple of people mentioned aged care or ramping or whatever. And I said, well, how does anybody know why you're here? That's why the media get to also portray those marches in such a negative way to divide our community. So next March, everybody turn up with your poster. What is your grumble? What is it you want changed? And represent that change. And that's what people can do with us, is get involved, engage with carers, learn what are those changes that we all need, and then start stepping up, start turning up, turn up in numbers and help us make the change these kids need.
Oh, Lisa, you are such a gem. You've brought so much light to an area of our community that has been in the shadow, and so I love that. Everything that I was asking you about, people would be curious about, and I really love that all of that has just come through today. I will link your Facebook page and your website in the description for this episode, so people will be able to connect with you. But anything our community can do to connect and to impact and to spend some time considering where your energy and your attention is going. Is it going to things that are going to transform this world for the better, or is it going to some superficial things that mean nothing long term? And I think all of us need to pause and think about that on a much deeper level. I don't think we do enough of that. I think we spend a lot of time giving ourselves grief, but there's not a pause on what's my community impact? What am I doing as somebody in this world? And it doesn't have to be global. We're not asking for, massive things, but like you said, it could be like finding out where one of the foster carers is close by and offering a tray of lasagna, like you said, or it might be reaching out to say, hey, I've got this skill set, what can I do? And I love that you brought that into the conversation. I so appreciate you joining me on the show today, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What you're doing is wonderful too. So thank you for giving people the opportunity to share, to talk about what they do, and also how do we build and make our community better. So thank you.
Yes, I agree. It's one of my favorite things to do, and a lot of the time people ask me, like, do you get a lot of attention, like with the podcast? How's it tracking? Like, are you earning anything from the podcast? From the get-go, my intention for this podcast was never about outcomes. It was never about being number one or anything like that. For me, it is, there are good people that deserve for their story to be heard, for their work to be, to have more awareness to. And when we met, it was like this fire. I just so knew that you needed to be part of this show, and I'm so glad. It was just, it was such a great conversation. So thanks again, and I'm sure we will have a part two, because there's still a lot to dissect. There are lots of different branches to this, but this is a good first step in bringing awareness. So that's awesome.